My mother-in-law accused me of faking my pregnancy, tried to prove it by shoving me over a railing, and the hospital exposed a hidden truth that turned my life upside down. Have you ever felt the sensation of gravity betraying you? The sickening, vertiginous lurch of the ground disappearing beneath your feet? Not because of a clumsy misstep or a rotted floorboard, but because the hands of a woman who was supposed to be your family, the grandmother of the child growing inside you, deliberately, with malice aforethought, pushed you into the void. That specific weightless horror is a feeling that still wakes me up in the middle of the night, drenched in a cold sweat, my hands instinctively clutching a stomach that is no longer swollen, grasping for a safety that was stolen from me on a humid, suffocating Saturday afternoon in June. To truly understand how a simple family barbecue devolved into an attempted murder and the exposure of a family secret so dark it shattered 3 generations, you have to understand the toxic, claustrophobic ecosystem of the Harrison family, a world that revolved entirely around the gravitational pull of my mother-in-law, Beatrice. She was a woman who viewed her son not as a person, but as a possession, a trophy she had curated, and she viewed me not as his wife, but as the interloper, the thief who had broken into her museum and stolen the centerpiece. Our journey to parenthood had been a war of attrition, a 3-year descent into the hell of infertility that Beatrice watched with a cold, detached amusement. While Liam and I navigated the bruising cycle of IVF, the daily injections that turned my stomach into a map of blue and purple bruises, the hormonal surges that left me weeping on the bathroom floor, the crushing silence of the car rides home after yet another negative test, Beatrice offered no comfort. Instead, she offered judgment. She would sit in her pristine, white-carpeted living room, sipping her herbal tea, and muse aloud about how, in her day, women didn't need science to do a woman's job, implying that my body's failure was a character flaw, a sign that perhaps the universe, or God, or biology itself, agreed with her assessment that I was unworthy of her bloodline. When the miracle finally happened, when the second pink line appeared and the blood test confirmed that against all odds, we were pregnant, I expected the thaw. I expected that the promise of a grandchild, the continuation of the Harrison name she obsessed over, would finally bridge the chasm between us. I was wrong. When we announced the news at Sunday dinner, Liam beaming with tears in his eyes, Beatrice didn't cry. She didn't smile. She went still, a predator sensing a shift in the wind. She set her teacup down with a deliberate porcelain clink that sounded like a gavel, looked me dead in the eye with a shark-like stare, and asked a single, chilling question. Are you sure? It wasn't asked with concern for a potential false positive. It was asked with the skepticism of a detective interrogating a known perjurer. That moment was the first crack in the dam, the first signal that she wasn't just an overbearing mother-in-law, but an enemy combatant who viewed my pregnancy not as a blessing, but as a deception. As the weeks turned into months, her behavior escalated from passive-aggressive to deeply, terrifyingly paranoid. The pregnancy triggered something feral in her, a delusion that festered and grew with every inch my belly expanded. She began dropping by our house unannounced, letting herself in with a key Liam refused to take back, her eyes scanning my body like an MRI machine, looking for flaws in the narrative she was constructing in her head. She made comments about how I didn't carry like the women in the Harrison family, how my morning sickness seemed theatrical and timed perfectly to get out of social obligations, and how it was deeply suspicious that I never let her come to the ultrasound appointments. Despite the fact that those were intimate moments, Liam and I barely had the emotional bandwidth to process ourselves. The gaslighting was a slow drip poison. She would recount conversations we never had, claiming I had told her the due date was October when it was August, trying to make Liam believe I was losing track of my own lies. She would tell family friends in hushed, sympathetic tones that I was having a phantom pregnancy brought on by the trauma of IVF, planting the seed that I was mentally unstable, so that if I did complain about her, I would look like the crazy one. I remember walking into a room at a cousin's birthday party and the conversation dying instantly, a dozen pairs of eyes dropping to my stomach with a suspicion that Beatrice had carefully curated. She would touch my belly without asking, but her hands weren't gentle. They were probing, pressing too hard, her fingers digging in as if she were trying to feel for the seam of a prosthetic pad beneath my sweater. When I would flinch and pull away, protecting the life inside me, she would laugh that brittle, glass-shattering laugh and say, "Oh, you're so jumpy, Chloe," almost as if you have something to hide. Real pregnant women love to be touched. I started locking the bathroom door even when I was home alone, terrified that she would burst in to catch me without a bump. I stopped eating anything she brought over, a survival instinct that felt paranoid at the time. She was always bringing me special smoothies and teas for the nausea, but I couldn't shake the feeling that her kindness was a Trojan horse. Liam, sweet, conflict-avoidant Liam, was drowning in the middle. He was a man torn between the mother who had raised him with a suffocating grip and the wife who was carrying his child. He played the role of the peacemaker, constantly telling me that she didn't mean it, that she was just quirky and old-fashioned, and that she would melt once the baby was here. He was so desperate to maintain the illusion of a happy family that he didn't see the knife she was sharpening, and his blindness made me feel isolated, as if I were the only one noticing that the house was filling with gas while everyone else lit matches. The breaking point should have been the nursery incident. I came home one afternoon in my 7th month to find her in the room we had painted a soft, hopeful yellow. She was going through the dresser drawers, pulling out the onesies and blankets I had washed and folded with such care, holding them up with a look of absolute disdain. When I asked her what she was doing, she turned to me, her face twisted into a sneer, and said, "I'm just checking if any of this still has the tags on it for when you have to return it all after the charade ends. It would be a shame to waste Liam's money on props." I kicked her out that day, screaming at her to get off off my property, my voice raw with hormones and rage. But when Liam came home, she had already called him, spinning a story about me having a hormonal meltdown and attacking her, forcing me to defend my sanity to my own husband in our own kitchen. Liam begged me to make peace. He asked for one last concession, the annual summer barbecue at his parents' house. It was a tradition, he said. It would look bad if we didn't go. He promised we would stay for an hour, eat a burger, and leave. I looked at his tired eyes, the dark circles of a man trying to keep the peace, and I caved. I agreed to go into the lion's den one last time. We arrived on a humid, oppressive Saturday in July. I was 8 months pregnant, my ankles swollen, my back aching, feeling heavy and vulnerable in a way that only a woman near the end of her term can feel. The air was thick with mosquitoes and the smell of charcoal. Beatrice greeted us with a manic energy, a forced smile that didn't reach her dead eyes, holding a pitcher of her famous iced tea. She insisted I have a glass, hovering until I took a sip, watching my throat swallow with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I managed to pour most of it into a potted fern when she turned to greet another guest, a small act of rebellion that I didn't know was saving my life. The party was a blur of forced pleasantries. Beatrice kept circling back to me, her eyes fixated on my stomach, asking questions that were traps. Have you gained the appropriate amount of weight? You look small for 8 months. Are you sure the doctor is competent? Maybe we should get a second opinion from my friend Dr. Eris. I tried to deflect, to stay calm, to focus on the view. The house sat on the edge of a steep, rocky ravine, and the wooden deck extended out over the drop, offering a view that was usually beautiful, but today felt precarious. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red, the guests moved inside for cake. Beatrice cornered me on the far end of the deck, near a section of railing that looked weathered and gray. We were alone. The music from the house was loud, drowning out the noise of the cicadas. She blocked my path to the sliding glass doors, her body tense, the veneer of the hostess gone, replaced by the raw, ugly hatred she had been nurturing for months. I know what you're doing, she hissed, her voice low and trembling with a quiet, terrifying rage. I know you're not pregnant. I know you're wearing a moon bump. I found the receipt in your trash. I stared at her, baffled. I had never bought such a thing. She must have found a receipt for a pillow or a brace and twisted it in her delusion. Beatrice, that's insane, I said, my hand instinctively going to my very real, very hard stomach where the baby was currently resting against my ribs. I am 8 months pregnant with your grandson. Feel him. He's kicking right now. I reached out to take her hand, to force her to feel the life inside me, thinking that the physical proof, the undeniable thud of a heel against a palm, would snap her out of it. But she recoiled as if I were a leper. Don't touch me with your lies, she screamed, stepping closer, invading my personal space, her breath smelling of stale coffee and mints. You're doing this to trap Liam. You want his money. You want the family trust. You think you can fool everyone, but you can't fool me. I won't let you ruin his life with a fake baby and a fake marriage. I tried to step around her, my heart hammering against my ribs, the adrenaline flooding my system and making me dizzy. I'm leaving, I said, my voice shaking. Liam, we're leaving! I called out toward the house, hoping he would see me through the glass, but he was laughing at a joke someone had made, his back to the window. Beatrice stepped in front of me again, her eyes wide and manic. You're not going anywhere until you admit it, she spat. Take it off. Take off the prosthetic right now. Show me the truth. She reached for my shirt, her manicured claws grabbing at the fabric, trying to yank it up. I slapped her hand away, a reflex of pure protection. Get off me, I yelled, pushing past her. She stumbled back, not far, but enough to wound her pride. In that split second, I saw the decision form in her eyes. It wasn't a flash of anger. It was a cold calculation, a resolution. If there's a baby, she said, her voice eerily calm, then let's see if it survives. She lunged. It wasn't a stumble. It wasn't an accident. She planted her feet and shoved me with both hands, her full weight behind the blow, hitting me square in the chest. I staggered back. My center of gravity was already compromised, my balance shifted by the pregnancy. My heel caught on the uneven wood of the deck. I flailed, reaching for the railing, for her, for anything to stop the momentum, but the railing was old. It gave way with a sickening crack of splintering wood. For a moment, I was weightless. I remember staring up at the darkening sky, seeing the first star appear, and seeing the silhouette of my mother-in-law standing at the edge, watching me fall. Her face was void of regret. She looked satisfied, and then the world dissolved into pain. I hit the slope of the ravine, rolling, tumbling, crashing through brush and rocks. I felt my legs snap. I felt branches tearing at my skin. My body was a rag doll tossed aside, my only conscious thought a screaming prayer for the child inside me. Protect him, protect him, protect him. I landed at the bottom in a heap of dry leaves and agony, the breath knocked out of me. A sharp, searing pain radiated from my leg, but it was the dull, terrifying ache in my abdomen that made me want to die. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I lay there, staring up at the deck 20 feet above. Beatrice stood there for a moment longer, looking down into the darkness. Then, horrifically, she turned and walked back into the house. She left me there. I tried to scream, but only a whimper came out. I felt a wetness spreading between my legs, a warmth that terrified me more than the broken bones. I was alone, broken, and bleeding in the dirt, while the party continued above me. I could hear the muffled sound of laughter. It was the baby moving a frantic, panicked flutter that gave me the strength. He was still alive. I dragged myself. I crawled, inch by agonizing inch, through the mud and the rocks, toward the access road at the bottom of the ravine. I screamed for help until my throat was raw, until I tasted blood. It was a neighbor walking his dog who found me, a teenager who looked at me with absolute horror, seeing a pregnant woman covered in dirt and blood, and called 911. The ambulance ride is a blur of lights and sirens, the paramedics cutting off my clothes, checking the fetal heart rate, their faces grim and focused. I kept asking, is he okay? Is he okay? But they just told me to stay with them, to keep breathing. When we arrived at the hospital, it was chaos. Trauma team, OB team, shouting, bright lights. Liam arrived moments later, his face pale as a sheet, terrified and confused. Beatrice had told him I had wandered off or slipped, spinning the narrative even before I was loaded onto the stretcher. He rushed to my side, grabbing my hand, tears streaming down his face. What happened? Mom said you fell. She said you were acting crazy. I looked at him through the haze of pain and morphine, and I summoned every ounce of strength I had left. She pushed me. Liam, she pushed me. He recoiled as if I had slapped him. No, she wouldn't. Chloe, are you sure? But before he could spiral into defense, the doctors wheeled me into emergency surgery. They had to get the baby out. The fall had caused a placental abruption. My uterus was tearing away. I went under anesthesia, praying to a god I hadn't spoken to in years, begging to trade my life for my son's. When I woke up, I was in the ICU. I was groggy, in pain, and empty. The panic that seized me was primal. I tried to sit up to ask where my baby was, but a nurse gently pushed me back down. And then Dr. Evans, the head of obstetrics, walked in. She was accompanied by 2 police officers. My heart stopped. My baby, I whispered. Dr. Evans smiled, a tired, genuine smile. He's in the NICU. He's small, and he has a fight ahead of him, but he's stable. You have a son, Chloe. The relief was so physical, I sobbed, a guttural release of terror. But Dr. Evans didn't leave. Her expression shifted to something serious, something grim. She looked at the police officers, then at me. Chloe, we need to talk about what happened, not just the fall. When we ran your toxicology screen standard procedure for a trauma with abruption, we found something disturbing. I frowned, confused. I don't take drugs. I barely even take Tylenol. We found high levels of mifepristone and misoprostol in your blood, Dr. Evans said, her voice steady. These are medications used to induce abortion or miscarriage. Based on the levels, you've been ingesting them in small doses for weeks. If you hadn't fallen, if we hadn't delivered the baby tonight, you would have lost him within days. Your body was already preparing to expel the pregnancy. The room spun. The tea, the iced tea. Beatrice always insisted I drink. The specialized herbal blends she brought over for my nausea. The smoothies. She hadn't just accused me of faking the pregnancy. She was actively trying to terminate it to prove herself right. She was poisoning me to force the miscarriage she claimed was inevitable, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy that would have vindicated her accusations and cemented her control over Liam. The police officers stepped forward. Mrs. Harrison, your husband is outside. He's given a statement. He found the herbal supplements in his mother's purse at the hospital while she was in the cafeteria. She tried to hide them. He knows. The realization that Liam finally knew that the veil had been lifted in the most horrific way possible brought a strange, cold comfort. Beatrice wasn't just a bad mother-in-law. She was a criminal. She had tried to murder her grandson to win an argument. But the hidden truth wasn't just the poison. As the investigation unfolded over the next few days, digging into Beatrice's medical history to understand her psychosis, a detective sat down by my bed and dropped the final bombshell. We found records from 30 years ago, the detective said, flipping open a file. Beatrice Harrison never gave birth to Liam. She faked a pregnancy for 9 months to trap his father into marriage, wearing padding, faking symptoms. Then, she adopted Liam privately through a gray market agency and passed him off as her biological child. Her husband died, never knowing. The revelation was like a puzzle piece snapping into place, explaining the obsession, the paranoia, the specific accusations. She was reliving her own crime through me. She was attacking the mirror that showed her what she wasn't. She couldn't believe I was actually pregnant because she had never been able to do it. She thought every woman was a liar because she was the ultimate liar. Liam, my poor, broken husband, had his entire identity shattered in a single week. His mother was a monster, and his biological origin was a lie fabricated to secure a marriage. He came into my room that night, a shell of a man, and wept into my shoulder, apologizing over and over until his voice gave out. He had cut her off completely. Restraining orders filed, police statements given. He chose us. Finally, unequivocally, he chose us. Beatrice was arrested at the hospital. She was charged with 2 counts of attempted murder, poisoning, and fraud. The trial was a media circus, but I didn't watch it. I was too busy in the NICU, holding the tiny hand of a boy who had survived a fall, a poisoning, and a grandmother's madness. We named him Noah, meaning rest and comfort, because he was the calm after the storm. It took a year for my leg to heal, and longer for my heart. We sold the house, moved 3 states away, and built a fortress of privacy around our little family. Liam is in therapy, deconstructing a lifetime of manipulation. Noah is 2 now, a wild, happy toddler who loves to climb, and every time I see him, I am reminded of the miracle of his existence. The new normal is quiet. It is safe. We don't drink tea anymore. We don't have family barbecues, but we have each other, and we have the truth. And sometimes, when the wind blows through the trees at night, I think of Beatrice sitting in her cell, trapped in the very reality she tried to force on me alone, with nothing but her lies to keep her warm. You might think that seeing the woman who tried to kill you led away in handcuffs would be the end of the story, the moment where the credits roll and the music swells, but anyone who has survived a narcissist of Beatrice's caliber knows that an arrest is not a conclusion. It is merely a change of venue for the war. The year following that night in the ravine was not a peaceful recovery, but a grueling, suffocating navigation of the legal system and the wreckage of my husband's identity, a period where we learned that the tentacles of her manipulation reached further and deeper than we ever could have imagined. We lived in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the trial, terrified that somehow, some way, she would charm a judge or manipulate a jury into believing her twisted version of reality, that she was just a confused grandmother and I was a hysterical, clumsy woman who had slipped. The prosecution was aggressive, armed with the toxicology reports tests showing the poison in my blood and the adoption records that proved Liam was a stolen child. But Beatrice was not going down without a fight, hiring a defense team that cost more than our house to spin a narrative of dementia and misunderstanding. The trial itself was a spectacle of psychological violence, a daily marathon of sitting in a freezing courtroom just feet away from the woman who had shoved me off a deck, listening as her lawyers tried to dismantle my character, suggesting that perhaps I had taken the abortion pills myself in a fit of postpartum depression before the baby was even born, a theory so vile and baseless it made the jury audibly gasp. But the true horror came when Liam took the stand, a man who had to testify against the woman he had called Mom for 30 years, a woman who sat at the defense table staring at him not with love, but with a cold, reptilian disappointment, as if he were a defective appliance she regretted buying. When the prosecutor introduced the evidence of the fake pregnancy from 30 years ago, the courtroom went silent, a heavy, suffocating stillness as the jury processed the fact that Beatrice had worn a prosthetic belly for 9 months to trap a man, then purchased a black market baby Liam to complete the deception. Watching Liam absorb the details of his own acquisition, hearing how he was bought for cash in a motel room from a desperate teenager Beatrice had coerced, was heartbreaking in a way that eclipsed my own physical pain. Beatrice's testimony was the final nail in her own coffin, a masterclass in narcissism where she couldn't help but reveal her true nature. When asked why she pushed me, she didn't cry or apologize. She looked the prosecutor in the eye and said, "I was saving my family from a fraud. Someone had to protect the legacy, since my son was too weak to do it." She admitted it, not as a crime, but as a necessary executive decision, fully believing that her judgment superseded the law. The jury took less than 2 hours to return a guilty verdict on all counts: attempted murder, aggravated assault, and poisoning, and the judge, a woman who seemed visibly disgusted by Beatrice's lack of remorse, sentenced her to 25 years in a maximum security prison. I thought I would feel elation when the gavel banged down, but all I felt was a profound exhaustion, a bone-deep weariness that comes from carrying the weight of someone else's madness for too long. But even from prison, Beatrice tried to haunt us. The letters started arriving 3 months into her sentence. Dense, rambling manifestos written on yellow legal pads, not asking for forgiveness, but giving instructions. She wrote to Liam telling him he was ungrateful, that she had saved him from a life of poverty with his biological mother, framing her kidnapping of him as an act of charity. She wrote to me detailing how I should raise Noah, criticizing my choice of formula, my decision to return to work, and warning me that blood always tells, and that Noah would eventually turn on me just like Liam had turned on her. We burned the first few batches in the fireplace, watching the ink curl and vanish, but eventually, we had to involve the warden to stop the harassment, placing a permanent block on her correspondence that felt like sealing a demon in a jar. The most profound part of the aftermath, however, was not the silencing of Beatrice, but the finding of Liam. With the trial over, he became obsessed with finding his biological roots, needing to know where he came from now that he knew where he hadn't. It took a private investigator 6 months to track down his birth mother, a woman named Sarah, who had been told 30 years ago that her baby had died during childbirth, a final, cruel lie Beatrice had paid a corrupt doctor to tell so she could secure her prize. The reunion was not like the movies. It was awkward, tearful, and filled with the grief of lost time. We met Sarah in a diner 3 towns over, a quiet woman with kind eyes and hands that looked exactly like Liam's. When she saw him, she didn't speak. She just reached out and touched his face, as if checking to see if he was a ghost. Learning the truth of his origin was the final piece of the puzzle that allowed Liam to heal. He wasn't the son of a monster. He was the son of a woman who had grieved him for 3 decades. We integrated Sarah into our lives slowly, protecting Noah from the complexity of it all, but letting him know he had a Nana Sarah who loved him. The contrast between Sarah's gentle, undemanding love and Beatrice's suffocating control was stark, highlighting just how abusive the environment Liam grew up in had been. It was a second chance at a family we didn't think we'd get. Now, 5 years later, the scars on my leg have faded to thin white lines, and the memories of that night in the ravine feel like a nightmare from a different life. Noah is 5, a smart, empathetic boy who knows nothing of the violence that ushered him into the world. We live in a house with no deck, a ranch-style home with a flat backyard where nothing can fall, a subconscious choice I made for safety. We don't talk about Beatrice. She exists in the abstract, a cautionary tale we will one day have to explain to Noah. But for now, she is a shadow that cannot touch us. The vindication isn't that she is in a cell. The vindication is that we are happy. Every time I hear Liam laugh, a sound that used to be rare and guarded, but is now free, I know we won. Every time I hold Noah and feel his sturdy little heart beating against mine, I know we won. We survived the fall, we survived the poison, and we survived the lie, building a fortress of truth that no one, not even Beatrice, can ever tear down.